Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, taking a super fun and exciting video for you guys today, and that is because Ymir, or Ymir, depending on how you want to pronounce it, has seen another fundamental update going to version 0.3.2, and this one brings in a metric ton of improvements across stability, across performance, and even has an overclocking mode, making some games that ran absolutely like slideshows back in the Saturn days run 100% perfectly fine and get frame rates that would be more close to modern gaming. And honestly, Striker X3, the developer of this one, has been absolutely killing it with Sega Saturn Emulation, so much so that I just did a video about the best emulator for every console, and I said that Ymir was very close to becoming my de facto recommendation for the Sega Saturn. And now with over 94% of the games on the Sega Saturn emulating and playing from start to finish, I really do feel like in the next 6 months or so I will change my recommendation from something like MedDefend over to Ymir. And that's not to say MedDefend isn't amazing. Ymir just has a much better front end that makes it easier to actually get into the games. But better Sega Saturn emulation is definitely a good thing, and we're going to be getting that today. Before we get to our involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined, want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. Now I'm going to go through some of the games mentioned in the patch notes. I'm just going to show you some of my favorite Sega Saturn games. Bulk Slash here with the English translation and dub, absolutely one of the best translation projects I've ever seen, runs flawlessly on Ymir. We're getting better performance if you so want it, we're getting amazing graphics. It really just feels like how you remember a Sega Saturn game looking if you had something like an HDMI out. Although I will say the Sega Saturn has the best RGB quality of any console ever made, so with the right scaler you can get very close to getting emulation quality visuals out of the back end of a Saturn. But honestly, this is a test I always run because the input latency here is important to performing in the game, and Ymir is 100% doing a spectacular job at it. Now going over to the GitHub link, and I will leave the link in the description below. You're going to see here this was updated 2 days ago as a recording of this voiceover. Ended up happening on Sunday, so basically I waited around until Tuesday to actually make the video. But 94% of the entire Sega Saturn library will be playable, and there's going to be a lot of improvements to a lot of the different emulation as far as the components are concerned, whether that's the CD block, whether that's something like the Hitachi SH2 processors, or even VDP1 and VDP2. And you're getting over 25% performance boost on some of the components. Now moving over to a game like Super Tempo, this is an interesting example, because if you try to launch it right now on the most recent version of Ymir, the one I am showing you, it will just black screen, but you can actually get it running by changing 2 bytes in hexadecimal in the memory editor, which is a very interesting quirk, but it means that Striker knows why it's not working, and right now there is just a workaround until that gets patched up in emulation. And if you actually take into account the games that won't load unless you change those 2 memory bytes, you get over 95% of every Sega Saturn game playing. Because once I got into Super Tempo, I had no issues with the emulation whatsoever, but I should say that of course I don't play 100% of every single game I show on these emulation videos. If I did, you wouldn't be getting any emulation videos because I don't have enough time to play from start to finish every single game I feature in a particular episode. So maybe it's one of those things, 5 seconds after I stop my capture, maybe Super Tempo crashes in the most spectacular of ways, but my guess would be that is not what happens. But again, it is a little bit of a trick, but it's interesting that Striker knows exactly why, just hasn't actually addressed it yet. If you go into a specific memory address and you go in and type in FF, basically zeroes it out, and then hit enter, the game will suddenly boot up. And that's really interesting. Just changing one value as a memory address gets you directly into the game, and then it's playing. And my guess would be the next version of Ymir that comes out will probably have that incorporated in the code, so the handful of games that need this, maybe about 12 or 13, will 100% launch perfectly fine. But I just love Sega Saturn. I'm always advocating for people playing more, and I totally get it. Some people don't want to buy original hardware with flash cards or an optical disc emulator, and some people don't want to go the FPGA route. So having really good Sega Saturn emulation, and trust me, Ymir's becoming the best, absolutely keeps these games alive and allows more people to play around with them. Let's go into the first of 2 soundtrack samples so you can hear the audio quality in the most recent version of Ymir. Keep your ears open and hear if anything is off to you, and I'll be right back to show you a lot more Sega Saturn emulation fun for everyone. So if we go over to the improvement notes here, you're going to see that both SH2 CPUs can be overclocked up to 500%, so you can get games running better, and you can even underclock them to 25%, because as the notes say, the Sega Saturn is very sensitive to timing, and you do have to remember that not every game is going to allow you to just run them 500% overclocked. If you're overclocking things and they start to crash, just bring the overclock down until you get to a place that is comfortable. And if you haven't updated your C++ distro and you're getting a black screen in all Ymir games, definitely make sure you click that link. Now if we go over some of the new working games, they range in quality from Super Dimension Fortress Macross, a really fun game, to Digital Dance Mix Name It Amaro, a game that definitely existed, but interesting random story that was actually a demo for the 3D M2 made by Sega and shown off at a trade show before they brought it over to Saturn, so it's a kind of really fun backstory, just not a very fun game. But there's comprehensive notes of all the games that have improved, and you'll see there Nights into Dreams as well as Panzer Dragoon 2, two absolutely heavy-hitting titles that are going to be better in this new version of Ymir. And for stuff that I just always love to test because I played the game dozens upon dozens of times with friends as well as my wife, Saturn Bomberman, if there's anything wrong with the emulation here, I do not have the eyes, I do not have the ears to be able to tell whatsoever. Because that is what's happening with Ymir. For most of the games you're going to play, you would have no idea whatsoever you're playing software emulation of Sega Saturn versus real Sega Saturn hardware or an FPGA core. And when I do these videos on best emulator for every console or how to emulate retro games, what I need is a recommendation to give people that I know they will be successful with, and honestly Ymir with a really nice front end and most of the heavy hitting games being perfect start to finish. I'm really getting close to the point where I know I can recommend this emulator to everyone and they'll have no issues. Now getting into the Saturn Bomberman gameplay here, not only is this game one of the prettiest 2D games ever made in my opinion, the color accuracy and rendition coming across here on Ymir is absolutely what I would expect it to be. There's no input latency in the controls, and even though Saturn Bomberman isn't a fast twitch game, you want to make sure that you have perfect control, or else if you're trying to round one of those corners, you're going to get stuck up on something because the inputs didn't work exactly as you would expect. Because sometimes the slower games are as important to get no latency as the faster games are. And again, on the SH2 overclocking and underclocking, stuff like Doom on the Sega Saturn can now basically run at 30 frames per second plus. And even though it's not emulation improvement based, Yazor, and I've definitely demoed his stuff on the Panzer Dragoon Saga decompilation and PC port, now has a tool where he can compare his decomp and port to Ymir to make sure everything's working correctly. And that means Ymir is doing everything it would need to do to be able to proof a project against it, and that is really important. Because don't think that software emulation doesn't inform these PC ports from the debugger to playing around to see what the actual behavior would be, where you have save states and can replicate it. Software emulation makes static recoms and PC source ports possible the same way that actually decompiling the code does in the first place. And I will do another video on this soon. I've actually made it, just not aired it. Probably have to go in and change some footage out. One more soundtrack sample, and I'll be right back with more. Now, I always say that I am not an audio expert, and a lot of times I miss issues in audio, but I will say right now that Saturn Bomberman music was pure perfection, and I have heard that song over and over again, not only in testing FPGA cores and testing software emulation, but just playing that game in my real life. And if somehow you've never once played Saturn Bomberman, I can't stress enough, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your good friend Video Game Esoterica to play that game, so do it for Uncle VGE. I assure you, you will have a lot of fun with it. And honestly, Sega Saturn emulation is not an easy thing. It is complex hardware, and for the longest time it's something that didn't even emulate whatsoever. So the fact that Striker has improved on Sega Saturn emulation so quickly in 2025 and now 2026 is in and of itself a testament to just how much coding talent they have. And at the end of the day, you're getting really good Saturn emulation, so you can just sit down and play some of the best games of all time without even thinking about the fact that you're not playing them on real hardware. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me what's your favorite Sega Saturn game of all time. I would be genuinely curious. For me, it definitely is Saturn Bomberman, with a very close second being Castlevania Symphony of the Night on Saturn, which is called Nocturne in the Moonlight, with some of the 4 megabyte patches as well as the translation into English. But if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.